Hi, welcome to Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm Robert Green, and I'm with Leslie Richardson and Phil Japixi.
Hey.
And we are in our next episode in our automated software testing series. In the previous episode, we started looking at XUnit. We did a very nice overview on it. And in the next couple episodes, we're going to do a bit more of a dive on it.
Correct.
And in this one, we're going to look more into theories.
Yes. So one of the really powerful features, and it was introduced in NUnit and carried over into XUnit, is the ability to do data-driven tests. And it's not just from a database, right? It's looking at all those use cases, right? So we had mentioned it in the overview, talking about the password checking, where I could write a test where I've got 75 different flavors of the password, and I can pass into the test itself this different password, text, and then even a Boolean as to whether it should pass or not, right? And so there's inline data, which we showed briefly on the last episode, but there's some other mechanisms that are much more powerful. And really, you have to pick which one works best for you. You can even call data from a database, right? And you made mention to that. So let's dive into the code, and I'm doing the Rachel Ray thing here. I'm pulling the baked version out of the oven so I don't waste time with me typing. You know, I used to say Martha Stewart, and people look at me like, I don't know who you're talking about.
I think it used to be the Julia Child, so that's even older.
I know
That's where
all
it
of
first
those
started.
are. Makes you feel any better. I know all three are.
So we talked about this last time, and this is, it's not, well, it is FizzBuzz, but it's not actually doing anything. It's just dumping it out to show you how it works, right? So I have my inline data. Each of these parameters that gets passed into the inline data method become parameters of your test method. So we covered that, right? And if I run this test, it's just going to run through, and actually it's a fake version of FizzBuzz. So let's just run this, right? And so it puts out, right, through the output helper, which we talked about. And so that's very, very basic.
And again, the beautiful thing is you entered 7 or 8 inline datas and it ran the test one at a time and substituted those in for you.
Correct.
Which is
And
fantastic.
each of them are, you know what, I have Zoom it running. That's not it. And of course, Zoom it is not running. I can zoom in. But anyway, you can zoom in on your computer, I'm sure. So anyway, inline's the easy way to do it, right? And that's probably the majority of how I write my tests in real life, right? Just because I need these 5 or 6 different things.
Right.
But let's say we're doing FizzBuzz and we're testing a whole bunch of different implementations of it, and I'm tired of clipboard inheriting this around. What I can do is I can do member data. And what member data is looking for an IEnumerable of object array. Okay. And then here's my object array, right? It has to be an object array because the parameter is getting passed in. So this is the exact same test as we had before, but instead of inline data, I say get me the member data using this method, right? And it takes a magic string.
What's test data with objects referring to?
I was looking
cool.
at
All right.
I scrolled too far. I pulled the wrong casserole out of the oven. So here we have member data, name of test data, right? And it's takes 2 parameters, and you look at my object array, and they each have 2 parameters.
Okay.
I'm really starting to like records more and more, C# records that were introduced. And so instead of passing in these variables, right, or these parameters with these variables, we can do the same thing using records, right? And so what I'm passing into my test is actually a record, right?
Okay.
And I'm creating, it still has to be an object array, but it's only going to be one object at this point. But the advantage here is if now I need to pass in 3 parameters, I don't have to go back and change all my tests. Right? Because I just have to test this method or change that to take in the 3rd parameter into the record, and it passes in. And if you're not familiar with records, they're very lightweight. They're read-only. It is a class, right? If you're looking at the difference between, structure or class, it is a class, but it's still a very lightweight class and gives us some value comparison semantics. Okay. Now, we want to go a little deeper than that. Oh, you know what? Let me back up. So what do we have here? We have a method that is returning an array of objects. You had made the comment about pulling data from a database.
Yeah.
So let's say that I had a setup in a database where I had the first 1,000 FizzBuzz in a table, right? Instead of having to type them all here, this could return the array by calling an EF-core method, right, or a repository method to get me back that array. I can use a projection to go from whatever my table is into this class. And now, if I want to change my test parameters, I add more data to the database, right? And so this will run, it'll call out.
And somewhere in between, you could pull down a JSON file with the test data, and there's all kinds of permutations.
Correct. And with the new support for in .NET 7 and EF Core 7, we've got better support for JSON in SQL Server using
Right.
EF Core, as opposed to doing some value conversion manually. All right, last thing we can do, and I will tell you that I almost never use this in real life. It's a little too much setup for me. So when we talk about keeping our code dry, we've heard that. We talked about that when we did the patterns talks, right? Don't repeat yourself, right? We want to keep our code as dry as possible. If you write something once, you should make it a function. If you write the same thing twice, you have to convert that into a function. If you write the same thing 3 times, stop being a developer. That's what I always say. But test, it's okay to be moist, right? Because one of the hardest things to do is, oh, this test is failing. Oh, but the test is calling this other method, which is calling this other method, which is calling this other method. And now I'm hitting F5 anyway because I don't know where the code is,
Right.
right? So that's one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of this, right? But again, your mileage may vary. We're doing essentially the same thing as member data, but it's a class. And the class implements IEnumerable, and again of an object array. And you can see I'm still doing FizzBuzz here, right? So there's my new list, and then I'm just using the getEnumerator method to return the data. And then if you want to see how that's being used, right, we just say class data. And then it pulls it in. And again, I'm using a record to tidy up all those parameters are getting passed in.
Yeah. Cool.
So I don't know where we're on time. I mean, that's really a powerful feature,
7
and I think I
minutes,
wanted
so
to.
we got plenty of time.
We got plenty of time?
Yeah.
Well, let's segue into assertions then, should we?
All right. Sweet. So what's an assertion?
So an assertion is basically what it sounds like, right? So it's a circular definition. You're asserting that the code behaved as expected, right? And so there's state-based assertions, right? I assert that I'm expecting the value 5, right? And then my variable is returning me something, and if it's not 5, it blows up, right? But we can also assert that a exception was thrown, right? And if it doesn't get thrown, then it causes a problem, right? It fails the test. So when an assertion fails, it actually throws an exception, and it's an unhandled exception, and then that's what gets reported into the test runner. So I could also, in my test, let's go back to my first example, and I can go in here, and I can say, oops, throw, sure, we'll just do this, right? Because that's what Visual Studio wanted me to do. And sometimes you just can't fight it. So now it failed, and we get the message here. What the difference is that when we get the message from XUnit, it's actually formatted, right? Expected 5, received 3, right? But I just want to, again, show the mechanics. All an assertion is, it's code that says this equals this, or it's greater than, or it's in the range, or this event happened, right? Because you can also assert on events. You can assert an exception was thrown or not thrown, right? And then if it doesn't get thrown, it's going to throw that exception well formatted so that your test runner knows how to report it. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy over some code here. And we'll make a new folder real quick. and we'll throw my basic assertions in here. And let's just cover, now there's going to be a lot in here. And when I say basic assertions, I'm really just checking value semantics, right? So if I want to check the date, right, I have, with what comes in NUnit, I have equals and not equals, right? And this is a little problematic because you're very seldom, like if you say, this happened at this time, well, by the time you actually get to the test, the time's going to be different, maybe by clock ticks, right? So what's built into NUnit isn't always
NUnit
great.
or XUnit?
XUnit, sorry,
Okay.
thank you. I used NUnit for a lot of years. It was a good framework, so that's still a good framework. It's just XUnit is better. So we have what's called the Fluent assertions, and it's an additional package you can bring down. And what it does is brings in additional assertions. Now this is irregardless. I don't think that's a word, but I'm going to use it anyway. Irregardless of test framework, it's just a set of assertions. So you don't even have to be in a test framework. If you want in your code to assert that something is true,
Okay.
you can use the Fluent assertions. Now it's typically only used with a test framework, but it gives us what we would call a Fluent assertion. So instead of saying assert dot equal like we do here, Fluent really is tacking on an extension method into the object, right? So here's a date time, and I'm saying should be less than 10 minutes before the other date time.
I kind of like that. Kind of reminds me of Blink a little bit.
It is, exactly.
yeah.
Link is a Fluent exchange,
Oh,
right?
okay, cool.
Right,
So,
because
yeah.
I'm doing where, order by, then.
Yep.
And really, when you're talking about Fluent, what are you returning out of a Fluent? We are returning a date time out of this should. What are we returning out of here? We're returning a date time range assertion, right? And so what you're doing is you're returning, it's an extension method, it's returning the thing that it's extending, right? So what the Fluent allows us to do, and they're much better with date and time, is I could say, I want it to be within 30 seconds, right? What I've done in the past, like I want to know, for example, our base framework that we use with EF has in the save changes, we update the created date time, created by the user who created it, the modified date time, and the user who modified it. Well, I found myself doing all these hoops and gyrations of passing in a date into the save changes method to then pass out a date because you could never match, right? Because it's getting save changes. Well, now I'm checking the record. To check the record, this is integration testing again, not unit testing. Now I'm pulling the record out, and the date now is at least a few clock ticks after when it actually happened. So I was like, oh my gosh, how do I test this? And that's why I discovered Fluent. I said it should be within 10 seconds, right? And I know if it's within 10 seconds, I know that I can safely say my save action updated those values. Because if it was 60 seconds before, right, and my test is taking 60 seconds to run, I have a problem with my test, right? And there's a bunch more. I don't want to go through all of them, but there's a ton we can use. Should be after, should be before, should be on or before. But they all start with should, and then what I'm going to leave it up to the viewer is to do a little experimentation to figure out what the data assertions are. String operations are also kind of a pain at times, but they're better than the data assertions in XUnit, what comes native with XUnit. Because as you know that comparing strings in C#, everything's case sensitive. Well, databases are case insensitive, typically. So DEF, if we did a SQL-like query, right, where we say DEF, like DEF, in case doesn't matter, and return true.
Right.
Well, when you do an EF core call, it also, against the database, it also is case insensitive. But if you're doing link to objects, or you're comparing things directly in memory with C#, it's case sensitive. So we want to make sure that we have the ability to add in that ignore case if we want to, and we can with XUnit, right?
So is this a Fluent thing or an XUnit
This
thing?
is XUnit.
Okay.
Yep. So we get the contains, does not contain, right? Ends with. These are all very, very powerful. When we get into Fluent,
Okay.
really the big difference is we get the should before it.
Got it. Okay.
Right? And there's some additional things. These are some nice tests that we don't get with XUnit, where I can say this pattern should exist only once, right? So
Okay.
ABC, ABC, if we said, did ABC in here would pass XUnit, but we only want ABC in there once, we don't repeat it, we can write it with the Fluent. Okay?
Okay.
There's also wildcards with Fluent. So if you think of your old DOS days when you're doing the wildcard entries, right? And I know some of the viewers are now looking up on Wikipedia to see what DOS is.
Vaguely familiar.
Vaguely familiar. And we can do regular expressions, right? So that's all things. And I don't want to get into hairy details. I typically don't need to use these as much, but they're there in my back pocket if I should ever need them.
Cool.
Sweet.
So that should contain once. That's
Oh, you want to go back to that?
well. I'm just thinking of where you get to use this. So you ask people to enter an alias, and then is it adding the at whatever, or are you supposed to enter that yourself? So that's
Oh, here.
a scenario where your test is, and if you've written code to detect whether they've entered that, you don't have to add it. If all they've entered is the alias, you do add it, then your test should occur once,
Correct.
right? And if it occurs no times or twice, then the code's wrong.
And for those who do not work for Microsoft, when you mean alias, you mean the first part of the email address before the @ sign.
Yes. No one else calls that?
No. So like my email address at work is phil@pentis.com, right? There's
Okay.
enough Microsoft employees, you say, what's your alias, right? But,
Yeah.
but
Got it,
us
okay.
humans will say, what's your email address? And I'll give it to them.
So there you go.
But you're right.
Even more of a reason to use it.
Yeah, because if you
Because
say,
when
what's
I
your email
say
address, you're just going to...
Enter the alias
Sure.
and then add the @ that you could easily wind up, depending on if two different people are writing all this, you
Right.
could easily mess it up. So this test would perfectly catch that. And then you can duke it out over what you mean by alias.
Yeah.
And since we're on this file, I got to say I can't stand regex on a good day. So seeing a little bit of the Fluent option for handling regex or regular expressions is exciting to see too. It seems a lot more approachable.
Well, the other name for regular expressions is write once, read never.
yeah, because I'm looking at that inline data, it's like, oh.
And this was a Google search of trying to figure out how to verify an email address.
Oh my God.
But the Fluent actually does provide a little cleaner way
Yeah.
of doing it, where I can actually just say match the regex here. And it just, to me, it seems more obvious, right? That's much more like the C# syntax for how you do regular expression matching.
yeah,
Yeah.
So
love that.
let's look at value types. And that's probably be the last one we talk about today, this episode, and we'll go into some other assertions for the next episode. There's still
Okay.
a lot to cover. Value types is very simple. Is it null? Is it not null? Right? The Boolean. So here I combined the XUnit and the Fluent assertions into one test just to demo them. There weren't that many options to talk about, right? And again, it's just, what do you prefer? Right? Assert.false, pass in the variable, or variable.should be false, or should be true. And really, it's kind of syntactic sugar. They both do the same thing, right? And they're going to throw if they don't match. When we go down to numeric equality, it's really pretty straightforward in XUnit. We can do equality checking. When you have doubles, there's actually a rounding precision that you can pass in,
Ah,
right?
Okay.
So you can determine that I only care about the first 3 digits, right? That's going to be much more if you're writing scientific software than line of business software. The thing to keep in mind is that it follows the official rules where a half, exactly half, rounds to even. Right? So this has nothing to do with software testing. This is just understand that if you are rounding a number in
Right.
C#, it's going to round, and it's exactly 0.5. It's going to round to the even number, and that's accounting. But we also do ranges, and this I find very, very beneficial at time. Right? I want, let's say, the execution time. You're doing some performance testing. And what is acceptable? Well, it's acceptable if it's between 1 and 2 seconds, right? Or less than 2 seconds or things like that. So we can do a range. But if we want to look at the fluent number assertions, we have a lot more options, right? So be greater than or equal to, or just be greater than, or less than or equal to, right? Be positive, right? We can always say, no matter how your day is going, be positive. Or you're not happy, be negative, right?
So can you just, like at the beginning of your application, put in an assertion, this dot should dot work?
You'd have to write that as an extension method. But yes, you could. And then you have to define what work is.
And the
snarky
answer
at
is you're
2
right.
a.m.,
It
like,
should
oh.
work.
It should work. Always pass back true. It should work.
It should work.
And with floats, you can do approximately. But this also I like, right? You can say be one of. Let's say you have a range of acceptable answers,
Okay.
right?
Oh.
Instead of saying, new list contains whatever, just say, hey, you know what? The value should be one of these, right? And that's really, I think what we wanted to cover today.
Yeah.
There's a lot more assertions. We're going to talk about exceptions, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but we'll have a packed show for the next show.
We'll do that next
We're gonna have more cool
episode.
stuff, mostly in the assertion space.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. So you rapping or
I'm
rapping?
Rob. I don't know who started.
I think
I'll
you
wrap
started,
up.
right?
Thank you
wanna
for
wrap?
yet another episode of Visual Studio Toolbox. I am here with my 2 guests. No, I'm just kidding. But we'll see you next time when we finish up talking about XUnit in detail.
Excellent.
Sounds cool.